the era of good feelings and start talking about the antebellum South or the sectional differences era of American history. The antebellum South dates, you need to know this, 1820 to about 1865. Okay, very important dates there. 1820 signifying, of course, the Missouri Compromise. Now, we've talked a lot about the Missouri Compromise. We said as you move westward, as we bought Louisiana, you would have a situation in which the more land you add, if you add Missouri, you got to add what state? Maine, right? And then that was only one situation. As we add more land, it's going to happen again. So they instituted what thing to kind of hopefully help with that? Do you remember? You're right if you said the 3630 line or the Mason-Dixon line. So 1820 starts at 1865 is an important year because, of course, that's the end of the Civil War. Now, Southern population as far as around 1820s-ish. Okay, if you look at this very interesting data here, okay, I know this is not in your notes, but if you look at this population, this will tell you most of what we're talking about. You notice whites are going to be green, slaves are going to be the red, and then free blacks, not very many of them except for in Delaware, are going to be red. You'll notice that whites predominantly outnumber slaves in all of your northern states, except for slaves outnumber whites in South Carolina. You might write this down or might quiz you over it. South Carolina, Mississippi in particular. Okay, so those are going to be those Alabama, Georgia, not outnumbered, but a significant number of the populations. Definitely are interesting areas when it comes to the South. Now, this is going to be your first slide, so pause it, get it down. All right, make sure you're pausing it. Now, the characteristics, that's like the descriptions of the antebellum South. When I think antebellum, I'll be honest with you, like I close my eyes and I see, are you closing your eyes? A massive, beautiful plantation house. What color do you think? White. Women in beautiful silk dresses and carriages, and then of course, how is that happening? All that money and all that luxury, it's happening because of slavery and cotton. Characteristics, it's primarily agrarian, you know what that word means, farming. Economic power shifted from the upper South to the lower South. That's where you see that slavery, kind of, especially in South Carolina, boom in Mississippi. Cotton is king. This data is interesting. 1860, year before the Civil War, and the year that Lincoln is elected president, 5 million bales a year is how much cotton. It was 57% of all of the U.S. exports, meaning going out. So more than 50 cents of every dollar was made off of cotton, which means more than half of the money in the U.S. is being made by the South. They're very slow to develop industrialization. That will hurt them. They have a rudimentary financial system. That's a good word right there. Circle that word, rudimentary. That means very low level financial system. Good vocab word for the PSAT coming up. And an inadequate transportation system. We've already talked about the fact that the railroads are highly developed in the North, but not in the South. If you look at the growth of slavery in the South, 1 dot equals 200 slaves. Well, what in 1820, remember 1820, what year? Missouri Compromise. You have South Carolina, kind of in Georgia, a lot in Virginia, and a little bit in Louisiana. You notice, of course, it's right around that river, Mississippi River there. But 1 dot equals 200 slaves. But if I change it from 1820 to 1860, it dramatically increases. So slavery is growing, and it's because if you look at this, by 1840, cotton accounted for more than half of the U.S. exports. 1800, that's Jefferson time, 7%. 1820, Missouri Compromise, 32%. 1840, Jacksonian, little bit after Jacksonian, 31. But by 1860, the time of the Civil War, more than half of the money is being made by the South. So you think probably the South is going to want to say in how that is being spent, how that is being levied, how representation, how laws are being passed down. They're going to want a say. They're going to want states what? Rights. Now, this is just a very good image for you to remember what you're talking about when you look at slavery, plantations, and the South. This, of course, is a very famous image of slaves working what new invention. Probably, I should tell you this. It was developed. This might be a good quick quiz question. It's actually developed by a African slave, and then it was basically stolen by Eli Whitney. What are we looking at? The cotton gin. That's going to make slaves 50 times more valuable because they can do 50 times more profit. Slave auctions would happen very often. These are just some images I want you to think about, okay? So look at these. Remember, these video notes, they're all you take out of them. If you zone out, you're not going to get anything out of them. You're going to bomb the test. You're not going to know what I'm talking about in class. If you really look at them, these images will stick with you. 10 likely and valuable slaves at auction. With this, it says a girl 17 years old, a first-rate house servant, and excellent seamstress. I'll be honest with you, that probably isn't why they put 17 years old. Unfortunately, rape was a massive problem, besides the slavery itself. Slave auction Charleston, 1856. So insane to me to imagine that we bought and sold people, but this was within the last 200 years. Slave, kind of, if you will, I don't know what even you would call them, paraphernalia, or, tools, how to control slaves, leg irons, slave muzzles, tags. They would even brand them. It was horrifying. Now, slave resistance and uprisings. This one's going to be important, okay? There are a couple different ways that you can resist if you were a slave. So pause this, get it down. Okay, so the refusal to work hard, and that was a pretty common one. Although you wouldn't really want to, because of course you would be whipped. Oftentimes at slave auctions, they would lift up the backs of shirts of slaves, and if you had lots of scars on your back, you were seen to be as a risky investment because that means you rebelled. A clean back would mean you do your work, etc. You could sabotage your owner. That was even more risky. You'd probably end up dying. Or you could try to escape via the Underground Railroad. Now, you can take notes on this slide if you want to, out beside it, but I do want to make sure there's a couple things about the Underground Railroad I don't want to take for granted, Of course, Harriet Tubman, but the Underground Railroad, the whole goal, and this might be a good quiz question too, is to get to Canada, because even if you got to the north, they could still bring you back via the Fugitive Slave Act. When you were as part of the Underground Railroad, this is just kind of history that I like, that I always want to share with you guys. A lot of the times white Americans in the South would help you by hanging specific quilt patterns or messages. Like if you saw a monkey wrench right here on the left, that meant basically you need to gather up your tools and flee, so you'd have a quilt to hang outside if there were a lot of people looking for slaves. Or if you had this like little squiggly line path, that means don't go a straight route. They're looking for you. Runaway slave ads were tons and tons and tons posted everywhere, $100, etc. And a lot of people don't know this, but this is kind of where bounty hunting came from. Now, pause this, get it down. This is the #1 slave rebellion during this time period. All right, so this is called the Nat Turner Rebellion, and it was led by a slave preacher named Nat Turner. He led a group of slaves. He believed he was a prophet. You might want to write that down beside this. We're going to do an entire lesson over Nat Turner, so I don't really want to go into too much detail except for to give you the basics. He led 50 to 60 slaves to systematically revolt and kill about 50 to 60 whites in Virginia. They were, a lot of them, women and children. And with this Nat Turner, and you can see this is Nat Turner right here. It was 1830s that this happened. But this horrid massacre, here's your where, in Virginia, was depicted in the newspaper. And of course, everybody reads the newspaper. So they got very scared that the slaves would rebel and would turn and kill women. And of course, you have children here. It, of course, shows the slaves as being in the wrong. That's their point of view or perspective. I don't know, killing women and children, very scary thing, but how were slaves treated? How were slave women and children treated? So it's the circumstances sometimes. The big thing here, though, and here's what I need you to write down. Nat Turner's rebellion increases violence and discrimination against slaves in the South. Meaning that now when a white Southerner sees a black slave, they are scared they're going to kill them, so they're harsher on them. They have more restrictions, etc. So Nat Turner is kind of important. Now, we're going to kind of change paths real quick. We're going to start talking about something called the Great Awakening. Y'all heard this before. The first Great Awakening, it was what kind of a movement? Religious, right? We're probably going to take a little bit more of a detailed look at this image in class, but the Great Awakening is entirely depicted on this little image, if you will. So pause it, kind of look at it, and be able to describe to me. They're leaving church, and they can go one way or they can go another. So pause this, look at it, and be ready to describe it to me. Now, the rise of popular religion. Now, I don't think y'all have this slide in your notes, but I think it's kind of interesting. Pause it, read it. So one thing that I really felt was interesting was to look at this de Tocqueville. Now, de Tocqueville, remember, he's that Frenchman that came and kind of, if you will, viewed America. He saw egalitarianism, liberty, individualism, laissez-faire. There's one more, populism. And he has this quote, and it's really interesting. He said, in France, I'd almost always seen a spirit of religion and spirit of freedom pursuing courses diametrically opposed to each other, meaning spirit goes one way of religion and spirit of freedom goes the other. Religion normally meant, enclosing someone. But in America, I found that they were intimately united, that they reigned common over the same country, and religion was the foremost of the political institutions of the United States, meaning where there was religion, there is freedom. So when the First Great Awakening spread, the independent Great Awakening, American Revolution spread. Well, the Second Great Awakening is going to spread more freedom, but when this freedom, it's not for Americans, it will be for slaves. Now, I'm going to let you pause this, get it down, and we're going to talk about the first of these 5 things that come with the Second Great Awakening. Okay, well, basic information. You might want to also have this. Pause it, get it down. The Great Awakening, a series of revivals, 1790s and 1800s. So it's about 50 years in between the first and the second. The dominant form is Christianity, evangelical Protestantism. Membership in major churches skyrockets, and by 1840, that's the red right there, an estimated half of the adult population was connected to some church. You, of course, remember that while religion increases, spiritualism increases, the diversity of sections or denominations will, of course, increase as well. And this is a very similar scene that we would have seen during the American Revolution, but now it's early 1800s, and now they're not learning about independence from Britain. These people are going to be learning about independence for slaves, freedom for slaves. One of the things also that came with this new religion was this idea of an anti-alcohol movement or temperance. Pause this, get it down. Now, American temperance kind of started in Boston. You have to remember that this is kind of a mature conversation, and we'll talk more about it in class. So make sure you understand this, but alcohol is, for us, a very social thing. After you turn 21, what age? 21, you can do it socially. Back then, what they were doing is they weren't having a glass of wine with dinner like I might every once in a while. They are like drowning themselves in 100 proof liquor. So when you do that and you're a male, you probably end up going home or and beating your wife, or you can't hold down a job or anything like that. During the next decade, the temperance societies just kind of popped up, and the annual per capita consumption of alcohol dropped sharply. You can see 1820s, it was 5 gallons of alcohol per person in America. That's ridiculous when you're talking about 100 proof. And it dropped in literally 5 years to 2 gallons. So the temperance movement was a really successful thing. This was one of the biggest pieces of propaganda. Pause it, get it down. From first class to the grave. See, this guy's just social. Oh, now I'm getting in fights. Oh, now I'm drunk, and now I'm fighting, and now I'm homeless, and now I'm mugging someone, and now I'm killing myself. And who's here suffering? Definitely that. Education reform. Let's leave this for the next video.